Hello, and thank you so much for tuning into my podcast. My name is Kara, and I'm a holistic health practitioner for both people and pets. After working for years in the conventional medicine field, I realized that while our lifespans may be getting longer, our health spans are rapidly shrinking. And when it comes to our pets, both their length and quality of life are decreasing. When I turned to functional medicine and a more holistic approach to health, I saw dramatic improvements for my pets, myself, and my patients. Join me each week as I merge natural health for people and pets by focusing on the root cause of disease and applying raw, real remedies that you can use to improve overall wellness for every member of your family, including the furry ones. Welcome to this week's episode. Before we start, I want to share with you an opportunity that will only be available for the month of March. My course, entitled Back to the Basics, Transition Your Dog to Fresh Food, is being transformed to a self-paced course rather than a live 4-week class. Because the format is new, I'm offering this course for free for the month of March. There will be 4 videos, each about an hour long. Lesson 1 discusses macronutrients, the role of carbs, and I talk about my pet's own journey with fresh food. Lesson 2 is about micronutrients and dissects vitamin and mineral deficiencies most commonly found in homemade diets. Lesson 3 dives deep into balancing over time, fresh feeding models, and the importance of variety. In this lesson, you'll learn about my newly published Vital Pause feeding model, and I'll show you how to use my calculator, which is the first ever calculator to offer options for cooked diets. And lastly, Lesson 4 includes meal prep tips, monitoring your dog after switching to fresh, and tips and tricks for tackling common issues that pet parents might experience in the fresh food realm. In April, I'll host a live Zoom Q&A for anyone who's taken the course. All I ask for in return is for you to share a testimonial on your social media and write a Google review once you've completed the course. If you're interested in taking the course for free during the month of March, go to www.rawpawventures.com and click on the Courses tab. There is also a link in the show notes, or you can directly email rawpawventures@gmail.com and ask to be signed up. I hope to see you there, and now let's jump into this week's podcast episode. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Today, I'm super excited to have Dr. Odette Suter on. She graduated from veterinary school in Switzerland in 1994. Early on, she recognized the limitations of conventional medicine and questions its true role in healing. Her unconventional upbringing, combined with her own recovery from debilitating illness, has led her to explore many holistic avenues to uncover and treat the underlying cause of disease of her animal patients. Dr. Suter is an award-winning, international best-selling author of several books, which I will link in the show notes, a sought-after speaker and teacher, as well as the creator of the Pet Health Accelerator, which is a coaching program that helps pet parents cut through all the noise of overwhelming information and gain essential knowledge and apply it to their pet's unique needs. She's also lovingly known as Dr. Poop Lady, which I feel is super appropriate to today's discussion, which is all about the gut and the microbiome. Oh, you brought the hat.
I brought the hat, of course.
Oh my gosh. Welcome. I have a gut feeling that we're going to have a really wonderful conversation today, Dr. Suter.
Yeah. We always do when it goes to poop.
The poop, yeah, for people who are listening and not watching, which you can watch over on YouTube, but Dr. Suter has her poop hat, which looks like the sorting hat with the poop, mixed with the poop emoji. Did you know the first time I met you was at Super Zoo 2 years ago and you were wearing a giant blow-up poop suit?
Yeah, I remember that one.
That was amazing. Oh my gosh. So I'm so excited to have you here today, and I'm so excited to talk about the gut microbiome. And I am prepared with some kombucha, excellent for gut health. Yep. So I brought my good gut snacks. I brought my cat who's already climbing all over me. So I would love to just start with a little bit about how you got here. And I like to ask people this because everyone's road to the more holistic and natural path is a little bit different. So what brought you to this space?
Yeah, well, I kind of grew up unconventional. I always tell people I was born weird and I only got weirder. So
I love it.
I blame my mother for that. I grew up in Switzerland and she came from the French-speaking part and she grew up in a city and we lived in the German-speaking part out in the country. So it's like, you had this plant from the city was speaking a different language transplanted into like a very kind of like more conservative sort of part of
Yeah.
the Swiss society where everything had to be just so, and what were the neighbors going to say? Like a little bit more restricted. And so
Yeah.
she really didn't quite fit in, and I didn't fit in that way either. In a way, I mean, as a kid, you don't like to not fit in, but the reality is, I think that most people don't feel like they fit in. I think it's just how most people feel. But in any case, that kind of led me towards, thinking a little unconventionally. We had an organic, garden. I mean, nobody was talking about organic back then, but we were planting our food and things like that. And so just that unconventional upbringing sort of opened up my brain early on to really ask questions and not just go with the mainstream, thinking that is kind of put upon us, basically.
So many of us just kind of fall into it because everyone else is doing it. Yeah.
Exactly. As much as I wanted to fit in and everything, it just didn't work because I guess I was who I am. That's sort of a little bit what started it, and then I was always just open to more herbal things and more massage. I was a avid horseback rider, and I would try to do all sorts of things for the horse that I was riding, do some Tellington touch and things like that. And people would always ask me, well, is he sick? And I'm like, no, he just is getting a little massage. What's wrong with that? Well, back then, nobody, it just wasn't a thing. And so it just kept going. I went to vet school and I was questioning everything there and also questioning the role of healing. And particularly when I had my first job, I thought I was getting in with a more holistically oriented vet who was doing acupuncture and homeopathy, but it turned out that mostly he was practicing conventional medicine. Either we were giving pain meds or steroids or antibiotics, and then they would come back for the same issue again. I'm like, well, that can't be it. And so even during vet school, I had some unconventional mentors as well who were teaching me more about the role of nature in healing, and if we can mimic what nature provides and what nature basically dictates as far as physiology is concerned, especially for horses. I grew up with horses being stuck in a prison basically, and this veterinarian taught me that that's why they get so sick. That's why they have all of these issues. And what do we need to do to bring them back to health is put them outside, let them move because that's their physiology. And so I've taken all of that, looking at what nature is providing and employing that in my approach to healing. The physiology was made in a certain way to thrive in nature. And with what we were given, we've kind of done the opposite. We put all the horses in a prison. We put the humans in a prison. And we put the dogs and cats in a prison. We did kind of the opposite of what nature suggested or evolved us to thrive in. And so that's a little bit of what I saw early on. And so I've gone, I've looked very much to nature and to how things are to help mimic that so that we can have the healthiest animals and humans possible, basically.
I feel like we definitely, it's almost like every year we move further away from what nature intended for us. We put ourselves in a box. We don't have bare feet touching the ground or the soil anymore. We live in an urban environment and we never go out into nature. And even like our kitties are mostly indoor now, depending on where you live. Sometimes for their safety, of course, if you live in the middle of a city versus like a farm. But yeah, it's hard. So I really love the way you've encompassed like the importance of bringing nature back in. And I feel like that is a great segue into our main topic today, which is gut health, because I think nature is what's missing in a lot of our guts, specifically like the different species and things that we would otherwise be ingesting or be exposed to if we were in nature a little bit more often. So tell us about the gut microbiome, which is a gigantic topic, I know, but why is it so important? Why do we start here?
Yeah. So we have to kind of go back in history and look at evolution, basically, again, back to nature, right? And so, well, just to kind of start out, the microbiome is basically an array of microbes that we have in and around us, including the environment that it lives in. So we have bacteria, viruses, parasites, protozoa, fungi, archaea, which are like more of an ancient type of microbe. So we have all of those that live in and around us, and they were born somewhere around 4 billion years ago. Obviously, there's been an evolution. Viruses came a bit later, but in any case, they've been around for a gazillion years, you can say. And so they have really mastered the ability to evolve and survive in whatever environment that they are exposed to, basically. So they have a huge ability to adapt. And they can adapt so quickly in nature that if we were to try to reproduce that in a lab, it would take, I don't remember how many years longer, but we wouldn't even get it done in a lifetime, basically. So every minute or every hour that there's some evolution going on out in the world of microbes, that would take forever for us to reproduce that. And not only that, it would also create a lot of pollution in the process because we cannot make it as well as they can. So why not look to them, right? They have basically survived, they've adapted, and they've not been gotten extinct, even during the, ice ages and whatever other climate change that happened along the way. They've survived. They can survive in sulfur-rich environments. They can live in highly acidic things. They can live in hot springs. They can basically live everywhere. So they're kind of extremists in that way as well. So in any case, that's why they are so important, and it's so important to re-include them in our way of approaching health and longevity in that sense, because they know how to do it and we don't. Because for one, we have so many cells. We're like a multicellular organism that doesn't adapt very quickly. For example, dogs and cats, they did not adapt to eating carbohydrates in the last 100 years. Physiology changes at the level of a multicellular organism takes much, much longer than that. And so what is helping, with the adaptation to what's happening in this world right now? Because as we know, there's a lot of change happening, right? And a lot of pollution, a lot of toxicity, a lot of everything. So we have to adapt to that new thing. And what is helping us adapt are these microbes, because they can adapt to the environment, and then they can, as a result, then produce biochemical compounds that will help the body then to be able to perform. And
our postbiotics.
Yeah, exactly. And we really have to look at genetic material as well. Obviously, microbes, they outnumber us by a factor of 10, depending on whether we went to the bathroom or not, from a cellular perspective. But from a genetic perspective, they outnumber us by a factor of 1,200. So if you look at a flea, or actually, let's look at a fruit fly. They have about 19,000 genes. A flea has about 33,000 genes. And a mammal has somewhere around 19,000. So we are between, from a genetic standpoint, we're between a flea and a fruit fly. So how is it that a simple organism like a fruit fly probably only has a few cells and not a whole lot of, it's not a very, it's still complex because they can fly and do all sorts of things, but still it's never as complex as a mammal that has, like, I don't remember how many cells we have, but a lot of them. It's a very complex organism. So how can we thrive when we have less genetic material than a flea, for example? And the reason is because we have all these microbes. These microbes, they provide us with that genetic pool that we don't have. And so they're really the ones who run the ship. They're the ones who make neurotransmitters. They help with detoxification. They help with production of hormones and also hormone metabolism. They break down the food. They provide us with amino acids. For example, they can recombine certain amino acids to make taurine. They can make B vitamins. They make so many compounds that are necessary for the body to thrive. And, the body itself cannot do that. And so that's why it's so important to have these microbes. And these microbes, they work day and night. They don't stop. They just work. Just like the heart, it kind of pumps, it keeps pumping. It never takes a break. Well, these microbes don't take a break either. So why not use those who are working so hard, right? And then that way we have to do less, right? So the more we can support that community of microbes and basically make them thrive, the better they can help us and the better they can do the work that they are supposed to do so that we can thrive.
Yeah, it's like a 24-hour shift. It just never ends. But we need to support them while they're constantly working. I'm sure you know who Rita Hogan is, which I'm super excited. I can't wait to read her book coming out. And she has a podcast called Dogs Are Individuals. And I love how she puts the emphasis on that every time she speaks, just like you did, because we think about diversity and you could put 10 golden retrievers in a row next to each other. Maybe they're all siblings, but they're all going to be slightly different depending on where they live and what they eat and what they were exposed to, because even if they have similar from their own genetics, their microbiome could be completely different depending on where they live. I mean, anything that they're exposed to. And so it really just goes to show that we are really all individuals, not just because of our own human genome or dog genome, but because the many, many organisms that outnumber our own cells 10 to 1 are going to be completely different than the person standing next to you. So I really love that. It's a lesson in diversity for sure.
Right. And, when we look at microbes a little bit more closely and the sheer number of microbes that there are and all the genetic material, we also have to then start questioning, well, who is thinking? Who is making us do certain things?
Yeah. That gut feeling, right? Where is it actually coming from?
Are we human? Are we dog? Are we cat? Or are we just a heap of microbes? So where does consciousness come from? Where does it originate? Who's really steering the ship? Because, for example, if you have certain microbes that thrive on carbohydrates because you've just been eating a ton of sugar or something like that, then they're going to be the ones telling your brain you need sugar. So it's not really something that you're doing or you're thinking that you need. It's somebody else giving you that message. So it's kind of interesting when we really look at it. It's like, who are we really?
Oh my gosh, it's so true. So, all right, so we talk about how these microbes are constantly working for us, constantly giving us these beneficial compounds that we need to live and thrive and grow. So how do we support them? They're always working. They're probably getting tired. What can we do to make sure we're giving them the optimal environment to really then give us those postbiotics, those different compounds and substances that we need?
Yeah, well, for one, we need to decrease the things that kill them. Glyphosate, antibiotics. And I'm not saying that we don't need antibiotics once in a while. It's like in the end, you have to make sure the animal survives. But reducing things that are basically damaging the microbiome, and that includes a lot of drugs. And it's not just antibiotics, it's antipsychotics, it's all kinds of other drugs and non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, you name it. I think they have found that most drugs cause some issues, chemo drugs, all of that. So we have to look at minimizing the drugs that we give an animal and find alternatives if possible. And then obviously also looking at food because, for example, grain-free food has been found to have the highest level of glyphosate in it. And glyphosate is the active ingredient of Roundup that is sprayed everywhere in this world these days. I think it's like 70 or 80% of all water, rain and drinking water currently has glyphosate. Contains glyphosate. And because they do spray it on grains at the very end of harvest, just to make them ripen faster, for the non-GMO crops such as wheat and other types. So in any case, some of these grain-free, legume-rich, foods, they're so high in glyphosate that they will just continuously kill the microbiome as they go in. And there are some microbes that are more resistant to glyphosate than others, and so those are going to survive, and those are not always the ones that you want. So it basically decreases the diversity and fuels an imbalance in the microbiome, basically. So with the microbiome, it's not so much necessarily that we kill a ton of microbe. It's more that some are more sensitive than others to some compounds, and then it creates an imbalance, and that's the problem, because we want a huge diversity. We want a lot of different microbes in the gut and the rest of the body. They're not just in the gut, they're in the mouth, the eyes, the ears, the bladder, the lungs. I mean, they're everywhere, even the brain, the blood. So we want to have a huge diversity of them. So drugs, and then obviously other things that we eat, because if we eat more carbs, for example, we have a different microbial composition, and if we eat predominantly protein or fats, it will change that ratio basically, because again, they're very quick at adapting and very easily it can adapt to the environment and to what they're being fed. EMFs, electromagnetic radiation from cell phones, Wi-Fi, dirty electricity from dimmer switches, that sort of thing. All of these will cause some issues with the microbiome because the microbes communicate via chemical compounds, but also on an electrical level. And so if you have interference from the outside, like electromagnetic radiation, then that will interfere with the communication process among these microbes, and then they get all confused and nobody knows what the other one is doing. And so there's no real community or collaboration happening anymore. So that plays certainly a role. Stress plays a huge role as well. For example, I have some patients who have gone to the dentist and they needed it. I'm not saying they didn't need it, but afterwards they had some microbial imbalances as a result of the level of stress and the change that was also happening in their oral microbiome. So basically, because it adapts so easily, it's good to also test it on a regular basis. But there are definitely a lot of aspects that can affect the microbiome. Water that's not clean, because water tends to contain a lot of drugs. We call it polypharmacy. So if you have a problem, just drink unfiltered water, and then you probably will get some of the meds that you need in quotation marks to help.
City water is not the best. It's fluoride, heavy metals, chemicals. People dump their pills down the prescription pills down the toilet. It's just
well, plus just if you take drugs and you have to go to the bathroom, there you go.
You pee them out. And then the glyphosate, of course, from the groundwater and like runoff from farms being sprayed. So there are a lot of aspects that can cause all kinds of issues with the microbiome. Lifestyle in general. Are you living more in a rural environment, or are you living more out in the country? That makes a difference too. And if you live out in the country, do you live right next to a farm where they spray a lot of pesticides? It's so funny. I think that environment can be one of the most important factors that we really take for granted. I have a friend back in New York, and her boxer, I think, just turned 16, and he's getting old. You can see it. He's getting some muscle wasting in the hindquarters, and he has some lumps and bumps. His little nub wags and he wiggles and he runs around the farm outside. And this dog was a very conventionally raised dog. He gets flea and tick meds. He's gotten all of his yearly jabs, like all of these things. And he's been kibble fed his entire life. But what does this dog that other boxers dying at, 7, 8 years old have? Exposure to the outside, to the dirt, to the earth, eating chicken poop and self-selecting out of their garden and all these things that so many of them are no longer exposed to. So I think that environment is such an important factor that we just have been minimizing for a really long time.
Yeah, and exercise too, because a lot of dogs and cats don't get enough exercise, and not enough variety of exercise in the sense that it's a little bit more interesting to them,
Yeah, and enrichment, just enrichment in general. Yeah, like our kitties. We love to think like, oh, cats are so self-sufficient. We can go on vacation for a week and someone can just drop in and feed them twice a day and scoop the poop. And it's like, well, they really need enrichment, and they need you to pay attention to them, and they need you to really kind of make their brain fire, because otherwise, just because an animal is lounging doesn't mean they're tired. They could just be bored. And inactivity is a huge risk factor for a lot of things, especially for people. They say that sitting is the new smoking for people. The risk factors for heart disease ranks the same, sitting and smoking. It's crazy.
Yeah. And then we can't forget, some of the probiotics. They can also cause microbial imbalances, because I see a lot of people, they feed the same probiotic day in and day out forever, and it just doesn't turn out well. And I have a lot of animals too who are being put on probiotics to help, and they get worse. So
we preach variety. We say variety in your food, variety in your activity, but that also means variety maybe in your supplements, right? So that's true. You wouldn't feed someone only beef and cucumbers every single day for their entire life. So you also would not feed the same probiotic every single day for your entire life. Those
No.
are not the strains that you're looking for.
No, and not enough either, because the
Yeah.
microbiome of the gut has somewhere between 300 and 1,000 different strains of microbes. And if you have a probiotic, you may have 2 or 3 or 5, maybe 20 at the most. And so you're just feeding the same thing over and over again. And that can then itself cause an imbalance. And there was a study done out of Israel where they found that people who had been on antibiotics and probiotics at the same time their microbiome recovered much more slowly than those who didn't have probiotics or those who got a fecal transplant after the antibiotic.
Mm.
So yeah, I'm
Interesting.
not a huge fan. Plus, a lot of these probiotic um, supplements out there, you don't even know what's in it really, because the manufacturer doesn't put the information on there. Either they don't know it, or they, yeah.
Yeah,
In
it's
any
just like
case,
a
there's
proprietary blend. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, that's always a red flag anyways, because if you have, like, for example, a lactobacillus rhamnosus, you can have a strain that is anti-inflammatory, and then you can have a strain that's pro-inflammatory, and you have to know which strain is doing what, because otherwise you're going to potentially create more of an issue. And so if it doesn't even say it on the bottle what strain they put in, then that's a problem. And unfortunately, a lot of probiotics are like that. You know, they're not labeled appropriately. We don't really know what's in it, and so it's a big problem. And I think it's a big money making operation, because there are so many. Because you can see the more gut issues there are, the more probiotics are being sold as well. So it's a bit of a multi-billion-dollar industry as well, and so not one that's working all that well. Because when I speak with microbiome experts, most of them, you ask them about probiotics, it's like an afterthought. For most of them,
Yeah.
they're not like, oh, okay, yeah, well, okay, we can talk about that if we need to. They don't find most everyone who knows about the microbiome tends to not be big into probiotics.
If I'm going to think about a probiotic, I'm thinking about food. I want to get my microbes from the food that I'm eating. So things like kombucha or kimchi or kefir, or even when I go out into the garden and I'm picking my cherry tomatoes, I just pick them off the vine and eat them. So whatever dirt is on them from outside, whatever they were exposed to outside without washing. But what a lot of people will say is, oh, probiotics aren't even going to work because the stomach acid is just going to kill them when you swallow them. And if that were the case, then you would have a completely sterile GI tract, because nothing you ate, none of the microbes would survive into the lower portion of the intestine. What are your thoughts on that, or like what have you experienced?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. Just thinking without having done the research myself, but I know that a lot of microbes are encapsulated as spores. So they make it through the GI tract, through the stomach, and through the acid of the stomach. With others, we don't really know. Some that aren't spore probiotics, we don't really know how well they go through, I don't think. But I would assume that some will go through, because we do have populations of microbes, and a lot of them in the gut, so they have to get through. But
Yeah.
I think it's probably not so much that the stomach acid sterilizes whatever is coming in, but it will decrease the numbers so that it doesn't overwhelm the small intestine, because we don't want to have a overgrowth of microbes in the small intestine. So we do have microbes in the stomach. We have a bit more microbes in the small intestine, and then we have a lot more in the large intestine. That's where we should have a lot of microbes. So we don't want to have too many in the small intestine as well. Otherwise, well, I mean, in humans, they call that SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. In dogs and cats, we can't really call it that, because there are very healthy individuals that have many more microbes in the small intestine than they should have, in quotation marks. So it's called more antibiotic responsive diarrhea if they have diarrhea or GI issues, because with the antibiotics, we reduce the numbers of microbes in the small intestine temporarily. They usually come right back after you stop. But in any case, so that's kind of a little bit more of the terminology that's being used in small animals.
So, all right. So now we know the myriad of ways that we're kind of damaging our microbiome. So what are some approaches then to maintain its health or maybe even build it back up if you have had damage, if you had to have antibiotics, if you maybe were feeding kibble for many years or food that was heavily sprayed with pesticides and now you're making a change. What's your approach?
Yeah, so my main go-to is fecal transplants because that's going to be the fastest and more effective treatment that we have available. I mean, we can do food, obviously, that contributes to, because if we have certain microbes that are underrepresented, some of them will benefit more from having more protein because that's the fuel that they use, and others will benefit more from fiber. So I also do a lot of testing just to see what's going on with the microbiome. What kind of imbalance do we have? Do we need to add a little more fiber, or do we need to manipulate the diet and the microbiome with more protein? So that's certainly an aspect. If we have too many that are more carb loving, obviously the way to go would be to switch the diet. I mean, that's definitely one of the biggest and most powerful ways that we can shift the microbiome, is to just shift the diet, basically. And it does take about 4 weeks for the microbiome to settle in after a diet change. So I don't usually recommend testing before that because it would be a bit inaccurate because it's still in transition. But, for example, if you have an animal with an overgrowth of certain microbes that are hard to kind of get rid of, you just switch their diet. You just flip it around so that they don't have a chance to survive. You basically kind of shock the microbiome that way. So anyways, but yeah, fecal transplants are usually my go-to because, again, I'm trying to take a completely healthy microbiome from a donor dog and put it into the unhealthy animal. And that doesn't just include bacteria. It also includes viruses that are specifically geared towards balancing out the bacteria. So they call them bacteriophages. So each microbe, like the E. coli, has its own bacteriophages. Salmonella has its own bacteriophages, and these bacteriophages are there to kind of help balance out the population of some of these microbes that are in there. So when we do a fecal transplant, it's not just that we bring in new bacteria, we also bring in all the viruses, we bring all the postbiotics, we bring in some fungi, we bring in all kinds of things that we don't really have too much of a clue about yet. I mean, we're learning, but there's so much more than, again, going back to a probiotic, it's really just the bacteria that you put in there and only a couple of strains, right? Whereas with a fecal transplant, you're basically taking a whole ecology and transplanting that into an unhealthy animal with the hopes to change that existing ecology to become more healthy.
Yeah. Anything in isolation is not going to be, I think, well, depending on what you're looking for, but it's not going to be as powerful as having an entire compound. And that's in medicine, well, in pharmacology in general, we're always taking one isolate, one piece of something, and then throwing it at people or at dogs or at cats and saying, okay, this one thing is going to treat your XYZ. But when you take the entire thing together, you get that synergistic effect, and it's going to work in ways that you might not even expect it to or have not studied yet, but still give you the desired results. And that's what I really like about FMT. I tested my dogs about 3 years ago now, I think. I did animal biome stool sample I sent off, and I was just curious to see. And this is when they were kibble fed still. And it was interesting to look at their results and think about, how their stool was and how their attitude was, and then transition them to fresh food and then really note the changes. I slacked. I never retested. I really should have. But it's knowing what we know about the microbiome and how food directly impacts that. I'm sure I would see something completely different now. Because their entire diet is different, and their stools are different, the way they act is different, and their overall health is just different. And so I really should have done a follow-up, but I was naughty and I never did.
It's not too late. You can always do it. But
I could do it. Yeah, I could do it.
Changes all the time. So whether now it's just from the raw fed and from a more natural diet or not, I mean, that would be hard to tell. But the thing that I also like about doing fecal transplants is that the body has so many biochemical processes happening every second. I don't remember how many, but it's a lot. It's probably in the billions or millions at least. And so as humans, we have very little understanding of everything that is happening all at the same time. And so when when we see a symptom, then we pick a supplement. But if you look at it, that's like trying to take a sledgehammer and hitting a small, tiny little nail. So we don't really have any clue what we're doing with these things because there's such a huge impact. And compare, for example, if you have a certain type of microbiome, you're going to have a very different response to a supplement or a drug than if you have a different microbiome. So there are so many things that can affect how a drug or a supplement can work. And that's what makes it so difficult to also be able to predict what's going to happen because every animal has a different microbiome. But in any case, what I'm trying to say is that if we can restore the foundational aspects of things that the body, that kind of fuel the innate ability to heal, then we don't have to do all of these other things. Because if we fix the microbiome in the gut and other places as well, then it will just do it will do what it needs to, and then you don't have to do a whole lot more. And again, they have so much more intelligence than we do because they're so good at adapting and sensing everything. I mean, no human brain could ever be able to do that. And especially even if we knew all of the things that are happening every millisecond of each moment, it would require computer systems that are humongous to be able to really put all of that together and then come up with an answer what needs to be done. And so why not use these super intelligent microbes, these communities, and put them in there and let them do the job? And we have now a lot of microbes that can break down plastics, they can break down certain toxins, they use fungi for breaking down oil spills, all of these things. I mean, they have like a way of dealing with things that we humans don't even come close to it. So I have so much awe for these microbes, and that's why I heavily rely on them, because I don't know anything. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, I know nothing. I mean, not even
only in the grand scheme, only in the grand scheme of the whole universe. But in the holistic space, we know that you know a lot.
Yeah, but I still know hardly anything. I will admit that, and
we'll always just be scratching the surface.
Yeah, and it used to scare me and such. Now I found more peace in it, because if I can say I don't know anything, then answers can come in a different way than rather if I'm trying to make it happen and trying to figure out. Usually I don't get it's not the same. It's very let's just say knowing more about microbes and learning more about all of that is very humbling. It's very, very humbling, which I'm good with that. I like humble pie. Especially when it comes with a piece of chocolate.
Sprinkle on top. Yeah, I think if you're not trying to force something, if you're just open to the information and you're just seeking knowledge, then I agree.
Yeah.
I am going to put my nerd hat on. I've been rewatching Star Trek Discovery, which I love Star Trek so much. Star Trek Discovery, they discovered this new method of transportation, and it's sporulated, and they have like a mycelial network, and they talk a lot about like fungi and every episode I watch now, they say something about it, and I'm like, I should take a video clip and post it on Facebook, and then I have to physically stop myself and go, Kara, 99% of the people who you know on Facebook are not obsessed with Star Treks or obsessed with mushrooms, so stop. But now that I'm rewatching it,
why not introduce them to it?
I know, right? I should show it to everybody. But the first time I watched that, I was not in the holistic space. It's been, I don't know, probably 6 or 7 years now. I wasn't in the holistic space. I didn't care about mushrooms. These were not things that were on my radar, and I still thought it was cool. Now I've been doing this for so many years, and I'm rewatching, and I am so enamored. I love it even more than I did before. So I love her. I love how we're bringing in the fungi and the mushrooms into this conversation, because that's something that we really don't know enough about, and I find it so fascinating.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's been for me really eye-opening, because I did the lecture for the American Holistic Veterinary Conference, or a series of lectures a couple of years ago, and I did a lot of research on microbiome and studies and all of that, and I felt like I'm kind of at the beginning of my medical career again, like just breaking through into a whole other dimension of knowledge, of looking at things, of I mean, I felt like I knew nothing. So it was, again, very humbling. And I think it's good to see once in a while, though, that there's a whole other dimension that we are stepping into. And
Yeah.
right now, it's also a dimension that is most likely going to save us all, because we definitely need a little bit of saving right now, because at the rate we're going, we're not going to survive very much longer if we don't change. And so with all of that, it really creates that enormous ability to, or potential for change. And
Yeah.
I hope that we're all going to take it.
Yeah, we're not being great stewards of ourselves or the environment lately, but
Yeah, for quite
I
some
think
time, but, we humans
yeah.
we experiment, and
Yeah.
oftentimes, unfortunately, when humans try to experiment, it kind of goes a little wrong.
But
But
awareness is coming
yeah,
slowly. I see more and more people talking about it. I see more people focusing on their health. I see
yeah, it's happening.
it's hard to say because I'm the new kid on the block here. So I've been in medicine for a decade now, and it has always been conventional. I did nursing, and then I went back and I became a nurse practitioner, and I have spent my entire career in critical care. And I never even knew that another face to medicine existed because it never found me and I never went looking for it. And now that I'm aware, the past 3 years have been me trying to dial back everything that I learned and look at it through a holistic or natural lens. And it's crazy how many more options there are. It's not my way or the highway, which is kind of what traditional medicine, conventional medicine teaches you. So for me, it might seem like the numbers are big because I just found this and all of a sudden there's thousands of people and I'm going, wow, look at all these people advocating for their pets' health and wanting to feed fresh food and wanting to use herbs instead of pharmaceuticals. The awareness must be growing. But for me, that's a huge explosion in a small period of time. You have been able to see this growth, over a much longer period of time because you were made aware as when you were a kid and right away stepping into, my cat is shaking the camera. So sorry. Right away stepping into veterinary medicine. You said holistic is where I want to be. So I'm sure you have watched this grow from, I mean, its infancy, because in the 90s, the awareness was just not there on such a large scale, I would imagine.
Yeah, but the thing is also that the level of disease that we see nowadays wasn't there either. And
Yeah.
so I think that we're just all growing with what's being presented. We have to find solutions to the problems that are presenting, like, for example, a pandemic like COVID hasn't happened before in that way, especially the type of virus and such, whether it was one or, but anyways, I don't want to go into
Yeah.
that,
Yeah,
but,
yeah, I know. The
it's
rabbit
like
hole.
there are a lot of problems that emerge from that we haven't seen before, with the long COVID, with people not recovering, with people getting all sorts of things like these cancers that just basically explode. There are a lot of things that we've never had to deal with. And it's also to the point where we have layer upon layer upon layer of things that are now burdening us. Toxicity from deficiencies because we don't have the nutrients that we used to have. And then, the electromagnetic insults, mold, that's oftentimes what really does people and animals in at the end, because it really blocks everything from detoxing. And so we have these multiple layers of things that have now piled up, and we have to clean up each of these layers and start reducing them so that the body underneath can start to breathe again and function again. And that's become a lot more difficult. Way back when you could just change the diet and you'd have a huge change in how an animal would respond. They would be much healthier, etc. And we still have some animals that respond well to that, but the majority, at least of the animals that I see, it's not enough. Food is not enough anymore. And especially during the pandemic, with all the stress that was happening, it felt like whatever I was using prior and getting results, I was not getting any results. So it's like it's shifted so much. And so we've all had to grow with all these changes that are happening and adapting to that and finding new solutions to the problems that we've, created, basically.
Yeah. I wish more people would realize that, as tough as it's been for so many people for now going on 5 years. What we saw and kind of the devastation that ensued was such an opportunity to point out some of the disparities that led us here. Because the number one risk factor for severe disease or death in this instance was diabetes and obesity. But there was not one single national discussion about diet, not dieting, because I feel like people like to confuse the word diet with dieting. But what are you eating? What are you putting inside of your body? And what is your metabolic health? There was no discussion about that. And if ever there was a time to highlight, that was it. So we're so slow to learn, I think, as a society, and it's my sincerest hope that will change and we'll be able to accelerate the way we look at health and the way we approach health instead of looking at disease and the way we approach disease. We need more of a focus on health. But people are doing it, and awareness is coming. It's just coming slowly. So I hope it speeds up a little bit so we don't go extinct before we figure it out.
Yeah, but it's difficult because, again, as I mentioned, one thing alone is often not enough. And so people are struggling to heal their animals, to heal themselves. But there are so many layers, that need to be addressed all at the same time. And, having had a lot of chronic issues, health issues myself, even though I grew up healthy, in quotation marks, I ended up with a lot of health issues nevertheless. And so I had to figure out a system or an approach or a strategy that would really help to turn this around. And that's, how I developed my program to help people understand, because right now there's so much confusion, there's so much controversy, there is so much information that's just being thrown at people, but it's usually more like packets of information that have that people have a very hard time connecting with each other. So instead of having a puzzle that looks like an image, they just have a heap of puzzle pieces and they don't know how to put it together. And so nowadays it's become more difficult, and it's almost imperative to have someone who can coach you along the way, because otherwise you're never going to get out of the woods, because there's so many people who have supplement graveyards because they've tried everything and nothing has worked, or they're completely paralyzed and don't do anything because they have no clue on what to do. So it's like, that's a little bit where we need to go these days, is to help people have a plan so that they can then take action and have somebody coach them along the way, because it's become so much more difficult than it used to be.
I agree. If you're underneath a landslide of information, you just get crushed. There's no way that you can pick through all of the rocks and figure out the one that you need. And something that really grinds my gears is when people will say, like, well, I'm not going to spoon feed you. Go figure it out. Go do the research. Go read the study. People don't know how to do that. If you aren't taught, it's really difficult. People don't know how to read a study. They know how to read an abstract, and abstracts can be very misleading. And so I think when you have the knowledge and you know how to find it and you know how to educate others, that really becomes your duty. So that they can then take that knowledge and educate others. And it just is a chain reaction. One person can hold out their hands and touch 2 people, and then those 2 people touch 4 more people. And it's, that's how you make waves. That's how you incite change. And I think people are just getting tired, and they're getting frustrated and exhausted, and they feel taken advantage of. And they're like, I don't know if I can keep doing this. And I get it. I've been there. I'm sure you have too. But that's why things like, the Pet Health Accelerator, a coaching program that literally says, we'll show you, how can you find this information? How can you approach this? I think that's really helpful. So I would encourage people to check that out. And then your books as well. I love books. You can see them all behind me. Something to read or audiobooks. So you have 2 books, right? So you have What Your Vet Never Told You, and then the other one is The Inside Effects.
So
are either of those audiobooks by chance?
The second one, maybe, I'm not sure. I'm one of the co-authors, so there are multiple people who authored that book. What Your Vet Never Told You, that's my book. It's not on audio. I probably should.
I like to read and I like to listen. I like to read books and listen to podcasts. So yeah, I'm like a reader for the sit down and then a listener for the activity. So if I'm cooking, cleaning, driving, commuting, etc. So excellent. So I'll make sure I link those in the show notes, and then also a link to your Pet Health Accelerator program so that people can find something to help guide them if that's what they're looking for.
Yeah, because otherwise it's just difficult. I mean, in my own journey, I spent thousands of hours studying and learning and spent thousands of dollars on trying to fix my body, and it didn't work. And it was frustrating, as it took me 10 years to figure out how to heal my body. And people don't, animals don't have that kind of time. I mean, even when they're puppies, you don't have 10 years to figure it out, especially because you don't want to have 10 years of seeing your puppy suffer. Also, find someone, whoever it is, who can help you and guide you on that path to get to health as quickly as possible and maximize that function of the body so that it can do what it needs to do. Because when I talk to people, I mean, it's very sad. I always ask them, well, what's your animal's quality of life? Usually not great, but not horrible. And then I ask them, what's your quality of life? And it's deplorable, because they're so stressed, they're so anxious, they're terrified that they're doing something wrong, their animal will die. I mean, most people that I talk to, they have a good amount of PTSD from everything that's happening with their animals. And it's just, I mean, it really does not need to be that way. And so that's why I created what I created, so that I can really support people in a whole different way than I couldn't do when I was in private practice, because I didn't have the time to provide them with the education that they really needed to understand things at the level that they needed to. And then guide them, because now we have live sessions every week. So I guide them every week. We talk about what's happening with your animal. Let me know what's going on. And then we come up with plans to move forward, little course corrections, whatever it may be. And that creates a much more ongoing, much faster path towards healing, rather than seeing your vet every 3 months or something like that. And in between, you're kind of left to your own devices. It's just not a medical system that works anymore. And I mean, it takes both. I still have people work with their regular vets, obviously, as a team, but it takes more because things have changed. So we can't really go with that old medical model anymore. We have to, have new ways of addressing things, and not just what do we give the animal to help it heal, but also how do we support the people who are then going to basically implement that plan. And so we just need a different medical model. And so there's more of that popping up, with people offering these types of programs, in addition to just having regular veterinary care as well on top of it. But it's really heartwarming to see the changes in these animals and the people too. I mean, they relax so much. It's just really beautiful to watch. It kind of
absolutely
warms my heart.
I totally agree. Me too. I've been there with my own pets, and I've seen it with clients, and it is nothing makes you smile more than seeing an animal move away from chronic illness and start really living and thriving. But thank you so much for coming on. I think that this was excellent. I feel like, as with everything, we only scratched the surface, but if you're looking for more learning, definitely check out Dr. Suter's Pet Health Accelerator, check out her books, and I will link all of those in the show notes, and hopefully I'll be seeing you soon.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Kara, and thanks to everyone who's listening and making a difference out there. Everyone counts, no matter how small they think their contribution is. Everyone counts.
We are all individuals, and we're all making a difference.
Yeah.
One step at a time. So
exactly.
All right. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon. Bye, everybody.
Thank you for listening. Please remember that you, yes, you, are the driving force that helps keep small businesses and platforms like mine running. So if you liked what you heard, please like, share, and most importantly, rate this podcast. It's the only way we can reach more people and spread the word about natural health. None of the conditions discussed or recommendations given are meant to replace the advice of your health provider. So if you have concerns about yourself or your pets, please confer with a human or animal health practitioner. Have a super fantastic day, and I'll see you next week.